You remember the weight of it. This is the story of Zenith, the last American television company, and it ends in Springfield, Missouri. Not the picture, not the shows, the weight. That television did not sit on a stand, it sat on the floor because it was furniture. Wood veneer on the sides, a speaker grill running along the bottom that your mother covered with a doily and a lamp and a photograph of somebody's graduation. It took 2 grown men to move it 3 feet, and when you finally did move it, there was a rectangle of carpet underneath that was a completely different color to the rest of the room, because that television had not moved in 11 years. You had a Zenith, and you remember the remote too, not a remote like you have now. A little slab that you pointed at the set and pressed, and it did not beep, it clicked. An actual mechanical click, because that is how the thing worked. It struck a tiny aluminium rod inside, and made a sound too high for you to hear, and the television heard it and changed the channel. That was the Space Command, the world's first wireless television remote control, invented by Zenith in 1956. Your dog could hear it. Your dog hated it. You never once wondered where that television was made. Why would you? It was just there. It was in the room before you were, most likely, and it stayed in the room long after it should have. And when it finally died, somebody hauled it to the curb, and it took 2 of them to do it, and you did not think about it again for 30 years. So here is what you did not know. That set, or one very much like it, was built in Springfield, Missouri. And the plant that built it was the last plant in America where one of the great American television names still made televisions. When it stopped, that was the end of something that had been true your entire life up to that point, and almost nobody outside Springfield noticed it happening. You are about to find out how that town got that plant, what it did for them, and exactly how they lost it. Start with what Springfield agreed to. In December 1966, Zenith Radio Corporation announced it would build a television assembly plant there. That mattered more than it sounds, because since 1918, Zenith had been an Illinois company and nothing else. Every plant, every subsidiary, every payroll, Illinois. Springfield was going to be the first Zenith plant located anywhere outside Chicago. It opened on the 20th of November, 1967, on a large tract at 2,500 East Kearney. It cost $10 million to build. On the 23rd of October, 1969, less than 2 years later, the 1/millionth color television set came off that line. And it kept going. In its strong years, that plant put out around 1 million sets annually. It kept growing too, expanding out past 1.6 million square feet. Now hold that number in your head, because you are going to need it later. 1.6 million square feet. That is not a factory, that is a district. You could lose a person in there. If you lived in Springfield in those years, you did not think of it as a Zenith plant. You thought of it as the plant. Your brother-in-law was in there. Your neighbor did 22 years in there. The high school knew that a certain number of its graduates every June were going straight through those doors and would still be walking through them at 55. That is what a company town actually is, not a place a company owns. A place a company has quietly become the answer to every question a young person asks about the future. Back up, though, because Springfield inherited something that started at a kitchen table. Zenith began in 1918 in Chicago as Chicago Radio Laboratory, founded by 2 ham radio operators, Carl Hassel and Ralph Matthews, later joined by Commander Eugene F. McDonald, Jr. McDonald was not simply a co-founder. He held over 100 patents, pushed the company into subscription television concepts decades before cable existed, and set a culture of engineering first that ran through Zenith for the rest of its independent life. In 1923, the company became the Zenith Radio Company, and then it just kept inventing things you have used. The first portable radio, 1924. The first alternating current powered home radio, 1926. Push-button tuning, 1927. And in 1956, the Space Command, the wireless television remote control. That click you remember, that was them. It was the first device of its kind, and every remote control you have held since traces back to that aluminium rod. Their slogan, which they had borrowed from a Chicago piano maker called George Bent, who had been using it back in the 1890s, was this: "The quality goes in before the name goes on." They meant it as a boast. Read it again in about 8 minutes and see how it lands. By the early 1960s, Zenith was not simply a big Chicago employer. It was part of the reason the Chicago area made nearly half of all the consumer electronics goods produced in the United States. Half. One metro area. The scale of it in Illinois alone: 500 to 600 workers at Plant 5 on West Grand Avenue, making government high-fidelity equipment. 850 at the Rowland subsidiary on North Knox, making picture tubes. 100 more on West Belmont building ham radio gear. 500 out in Paris, Illinois, on radio receivers. Add it all up, and the Zenith workforce in Illinois came to at least 6,960 people. And here is one you will like. In 1966, the same year they were announcing Springfield, the Rowland subsidiary needed somewhere to make color picture tubes. So they bought a cookie factory, a Keebler plant, out in Melrose Park, Illinois. They bought the building where the cookies were made, and they turned it into the place where the picture tubes were made. That plant is going to matter enormously in a few minutes, so remember it. The tube plant was a cookie factory. Now the part where it turns. In 1965, every single color television purchased in the United States was made by an American-owned company in a domestic plant. Every one. 2.6 million sets that year, carrying names you would still recognize on sight: Sylvania, Motorola, Admiral, Philco, RCA, Quasar, Magnavox. 26 years later, in 1991, Americans bought 21 million television sets. And exactly one company was still making them in the United States: Zenith, at one plant, in Springfield, Missouri. Read that again. The entire American television industry, every name on that list, had gone. Bought out, shut down, or driven under. What was left of it was one building in southwest Missouri. The pressure had been building for 2 decades. In December 1970, National Union Electric sued most of the Japanese television manufacturers under the Anti-Dumping Act, alleging a conspiracy that also violated American antitrust law. The companies named included Matsushita, the parent of Panasonic, and Sony, which by then had become the dominant Japanese brand in American living rooms. While that case dragged on, Zenith's market share went to Japanese companies year after year after year. By 1990, Zenith was down to about 12% of the market and losing $52 million a year. In the first 9 months of 1991, it lost roughly the same again. You know where this is going. Springfield did not yet. The 30th of October, 1991. Zenith announced it was moving television assembly out of Springfield and into Mexico. The figure in the announcement was close to 1,200 jobs. The Washington Post reported it that day. Cabinet finishing was going too. The company said it would keep 300 to 500 people in Springfield on distribution, support, and plastic components. The work went to Reynosa, in the Mexican state of Tamaulipas, a border manufacturing corridor that would expand enormously when NAFTA came into force the following year, in 1994, making that kind of cross-border production shift faster and cheaper than it had ever been. Some accounts have assembly going to Juarez as well. And there is a detail in that reporting that you should sit with for a second, because it is a matter of record rather than interpretation. The move was scheduled to happen after the expiry, the following March, of the company's contract with the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers. That is the timeline as it was reported. Draw from it what you will. Then 1992 arrived, and the number got worse. The Springfield Business Journal puts the final figure at 1,500 workers and records it as the largest layoff in Springfield's history. 1,200 and 1,500. They are not a contradiction. One is the announcement, and one is what actually happened, and the gap between them is the part nobody writes down. By 1992, there were no televisions being assembled in the United States by an American-owned company at all, except, and this is the part almost everyone gets wrong, including people who lived through it, that is not quite where the story ends. And if you stop here, you will have the wrong idea about what actually happened to American television. Because 13 years later, in July 2005, a color television was built in Greenville, Tennessee. Greenville had been a television town for 60 years. Magnavox started there in 1947 building wooden radio cabinets, and by 1950 was making black and white sets. In 1962, Magnavox built its third plant there, the largest television manufacturing plant in the United States. At its peak, Magnavox employed more than 5,000 people in that one town. Philips took it over, and then in 1997 Philips sold the plant to a newly formed Tennessee-owned company called Five Rivers Electronic Innovations. And Five Rivers kept making televisions in America for another 8 years, quietly, while everyone assumed it was already over. Their president, Tom Hobson, blamed foreign imports and the dumping of Chinese-made consumer electronics. In the autumn of 2003, the Commerce Department levied anti-dumping duties of up to 48% on Chinese televisions coming into the country. In May 2004, the International Trade Commission cleared them for good. It was too late, and not only because of trade policy. By 2004, LCD flat panel displays were already displacing the cathode ray tube sets that Five Rivers built. The technology that Zenith and Magnavox and all the rest had perfected over 50 years, the heavy glass tube, the shadow mask, the electron gun, was becoming obsolete regardless of what any trade commission decided. The future was flat panels, and the manufacturing base for those had been built in Japan and South Korea, not Tennessee. Five Rivers filed for Chapter 11 that autumn and stopped making televisions the following winter. In July 2005, it produced an AKI brand color set, the last television made in America by an American-owned company. So what died in Springfield in 1992 was not American television. What died in Springfield was the famous American television industry. The names on the sets in your house. The last of them switched off the line in Missouri, and an unknown company in Tennessee that you have never heard of carried the thing another 13 years without anybody watching. Now back to the cookie factory. Because Zenith did not stop making things in America in 1992. It kept making picture tubes at Melrose Park. And here is the detail that should genuinely change how you read this. In August 1988, IEEE Spectrum, an engineering journal, not a booster publication, looked at Zenith's situation and described the Melrose Park tube plant as one of the most profitable parts of the business. Their words were that it bore witness to the company's manufacturing skills. This was the same plant that had just produced the flat tension mask, a flat shadow mask for a flat-faced tube that increased brightness by up to 80% and resolution by up to 15% over the curved designs everyone else was using. It was called a major breakthrough. Zenith closed it in late 1998, with final operations running into the beginning of 1999. Unverified. Sources split between late 1998 and closed since February 1999. Confirmed the exact final shift date before publication. It employed around 2,000 people at its height. About 1,200 were there for the last shift. Understand what that means. The profitable plant. The one with the breakthrough. The one the engineers admired. Closed anyway, not because it had failed, but because Zenith had made a decision to stop being a manufacturer at all. And within a few years, it would not have mattered. The LCD transition was already underway, and no American company was positioned to compete in flat panels at scale. That is a different story to the one you have been told. This was not simply a company that could not compete. At the end, this was a company that chose to stop making things. The rest is quick, and it is arithmetic. In 1995, LG Electronics of South Korea bought a controlling stake of nearly 58% for $351 million in Zenith stock. In 1998, Zenith lost $275.5 million on sales of just under $1 billion. In August 1999, it filed a pre-packaged bankruptcy and emerged that November, wholly owned by LG. Of the Mexican plants it had moved everything to, 3 were sold off, and 1 was handed to LG. Zenith began outsourcing all of its manufacturing, most of it to LG itself. Zenith entered the 1990s with 32,000 employees. It came out the other side with fewer than 7,000. The quality goes in before the name goes on. By the end, Zenith was the name. Somebody else did the quality. So go and look at what is there now. The Springfield plant, 2 million square feet of building where America's last famous television line ran was bought by Bass Pro Shops and converted into Sportsman's Park, the company's sprawling corporate headquarters. Sit with that. The place where the American television industry finally stopped is now the head office of a company that sells fishing rods. Not a ruin, not a field, a success by any ordinary measure. Springfield did not simply lose the plant and lie down. The closure also pushed the city into building the Partnership Industrial Center and expanding training at Ozarks Technical Community College. There are people working in that building today who have no idea. Melrose Park did not get that. The 900,000 square foot tube plant went to a developer to be demolished. And Zenith's Plant 1 at Dickens and Austin Avenue in Chicago, the original headquarters of the whole thing, was still standing as of 2024, abandoned, hollowed out further by a major fire in 2017, with the water tower still up over the top of it. Discussions about demolishing it have been going on for years, which brings you back to your living room. That television you remember the weight of, somebody in Springfield, Missouri built that. Somebody in Melrose Park, Illinois made the tube inside it that threw the picture at you. Somebody in a converted cookie factory. They were good at it. That is the thing that is hardest to hold on to. They were not beaten because they were bad at it. The engineering journals were still calling their work a breakthrough in 1988. The plant that closed in Melrose Park was making money. You threw the set out in about 1996, and you never thought about it again. It took two of you to carry it.